The grand house of Senator Victor Ashford stood on a hilltop overlooking Denver, a monument to wealth, power, and social prestige. Inside its walls, 20-year-old Catherine Mills worked as a housemaid, earning $3 a week and the contempt of nearly everyone she encountered. She cleaned floors on her hands and knees, scrubbed windows until her fingers bled, prepared meals she wasn't permitted to eat, and received barely a word of acknowledgement for her labor. But Catherine never complained. She had arrived in Denver orphaned and desperate, and the Ashford household had given her employment when no one else would. It was the spring of 1891 when Senator Ashford's wife, the formidable Victoria Ashford, discovered that her prized diamond brooch was missing, a piece worth $5,000, inherited from her grandmother and the centerpiece of her jewelry collection. The search for the brooch turned the household into a place of suspicion and fear. Every servant was questioned. Every room was searched. And when the brooch was discovered, placed carefully in Catherine's small attic room, hidden among her meager belongings, the conclusion seemed obvious to everyone but Catherine herself. "I didn't put it there," Catherine insisted, her voice trembling as she faced Mrs. Ashford in the parlor. "I've never even touched that brooch. I wouldn't." "Lies!" Victoria Ashford's voice cut through the air like a whip. "You knew it was valuable. You knew no one would suspect you of having the audacity to steal from this family. But you miscalculated, didn't you? You thought you could hide it until you found a way to sell it. Please, ma'am, I swear to you." "Guards!" Victoria called out, and 2 men appeared at the parlor doors. "Take her to the sheriff. She's to be charged with theft." Catherine was arrested, tried, and convicted within a week. The evidence was overwhelming. The brooch found in her room, her status as a poor servant with motive, and her protestations of innocence, which the prosecutor presented as the desperate lies of a guilty woman. The judge, a friend of Senator Ashford's, sentenced her to 5 years of hard labor in the territorial prison. As Catherine was led away in shackles, she caught sight of her face reflected in a shop window, the face of a woman whose life had just been stolen, whose future had been erased, whose innocence meant nothing against the power and respectability of her employers. 2 months into her sentence, Catherine was assigned to work in the prison laundry. It was brutal, soul-crushing work, but it was better than being confined to her cell. She had stopped hoping for rescue or intervention. The world had made its judgment, and she had accepted that she would spend the next 5 years as a convicted thief, her name ruined, her life destroyed. She didn't know that forces were moving in her favor beyond the prison walls. His name was Samuel Garrett, and he was a mountain man, a solitary figure who lived in the high country north of Denver, maintaining a small trapper's cabin and a modest trading post. Samuel had come to Denver to sell furs and purchase supplies, and while in town he had encountered a peculiar occurrence. He'd witnessed Senator Ashford's son, a dissolute young man named Charles, attempting to coerce a jeweler into buying a diamond brooch at far below its market value. Samuel, who had little use for society and its conventions but a great deal of respect for justice, had asked questions. The jeweler, grateful for an interruption to an awkward transaction, had told him about the servant girl who'd been imprisoned for the theft of that very brooch. Something in Samuel's mind had clicked into place. A young man desperate for money, attempting to sell his mother's jewelry in secret. A servant girl imprisoned on false charges. A convenient scapegoat for a crime committed by someone with far more to lose. Samuel had spent the last 2 months investigating. He had interviewed servants from the Ashford household. He had tracked Charles's movements. He had discovered extensive gambling debts, a paramour demanding payment, and a desperate young man willing to betray an innocent girl rather than confess his own crimes. And now, armed with evidence and righteous anger, he walked into the office of the territorial judge with a stack of documents and a determination to overturn an injustice. The reversal of Catherine's conviction came quickly, almost shockingly so. The judge, faced with concrete evidence of Samuel's investigation and the credible testimony of multiple witnesses, had no choice but to declare her innocent and order her immediate release. Charles Ashford was arrested. Senator Ashford's family was humiliated, and Catherine Mills walked out of the territorial prison a free woman, though one forever marked by the experience. She expected never to see her mysterious rescuer. She planned to gather what few possessions she had and leave Denver forever, to start over somewhere new, somewhere her name didn't carry the stain of false accusation. Instead, she encountered Samuel Garrett in the street outside the prison. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a weathered face that suggested a life spent in harsh conditions. But his eyes were kind and intelligent, and they looked at her with genuine concern. "Miss Mills," he said, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. "I'm Samuel Garrett. I was the one who investigated your case." Catherine stared at him, unable to speak. A man, a stranger, had gone to the trouble of proving her innocence. It seemed impossible. It seemed like a dream. "I don't know how to thank you," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "You don't need to thank me," Samuel replied. "What happened to you was unjust, and it needed to be corrected. That's all." But Samuel didn't simply walk away after that. He appeared at the boarding house where Catherine had taken refuge, bringing her supplies and food. He offered her a job at his trading post, helping to manage inventory and deal with customers. And over the following weeks, as Catherine worked beside him in the high country, she began to see the world through new eyes. Samuel's cabin was small but immaculate, built into a mountainside and overlooking valleys that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the horizon. It was a place of beauty and solitude, far removed from the cruelty and judgment of Denver. Samuel worked hard, trapping, trading, maintaining a small operation, but he was always kind to Catherine. He taught her about the mountains, about the seasons, about the way nature operated according to principles far more just than human society. "Why are you so kind to me?" Catherine asked one evening, as they sat by the fire. "You don't know me. You don't know me anything." Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "I grew up in poverty," he said finally. "My parents were good people, but life was hard. I learned early that the world doesn't care about fairness. It cares about power. When I saw what happened to you, a powerless girl sacrificed to protect a powerful family, it reminded me why I left society behind. Here in the mountains, there's a kind of honesty you don't find in the cities. The strong don't prey on the weak. They survive together, or they don't survive at all." He paused, and Catherine saw something vulnerable cross his weathered face. "I also learned that sometimes, when you encounter someone worth helping, you have to be willing to risk something to stand up for them. You were worth helping, Catherine. You still are." As months passed, Catherine's life in the mountains became real in a way her life in Denver had never been. She was no longer a servant, invisible and voiceless. She was a partner in Samuel's operation, her opinions valued, her work meaningful. And more than that, she began to heal from the trauma of her false imprisonment. Samuel never pressed her for anything more than her presence and her company. He seemed content simply to know that she was safe, that she was free, that she was building a life of her own choosing. But Catherine, watching him work, listening to him speak about his philosophy of life and justice, spending long evenings talking by the fire, found herself falling in love with him. One winter evening, as snow fell outside the cabin and the fire crackled warmly, Samuel spoke the words she had been hoping to hear. "Catherine, I need to ask you something," he said, his voice gentle. "In a few months, spring will come, and you'll have been here nearly a year. You'll be truly free then, free from trauma, free from obligation, free to go anywhere you choose. When that time comes, I want you to consider staying, not as an employee or out of gratitude, but as my wife, as my partner, as someone I've come to love more than I thought it possible to love another human being." Catherine moved to him, and he took her hands. "I know your time in prison scarred you," he continued. "I know trust doesn't come easily anymore, but I'm asking you to trust me, to believe that there are people in this world worth trusting, to believe that you deserve happiness after everything that's been taken from you." "I don't need to wait until spring," Catherine said, tears streaming down her face. "I've never needed to wait. From the moment you walked into my life and proved I was worth defending, I've loved you. I've loved you for seeing my innocence when the rest of the world condemned me. I've loved you for taking the time to investigate my case. I've loved you for offering me sanctuary. And I love you now." Samuel kissed her gently, reverently, like he was handling something precious and fragile. But Catherine was no longer fragile. The mountains had made her strong. Love had made her whole. And she was ready to build a life with this man who had believed in her when no one else would. They were married in the spring of 1892, in a small ceremony attended by the few neighbors and trading partners Samuel had in the high country. And as Catherine stood beside him, speaking vows freely and from her own heart, she understood something profound. The woman standing in that mountain clearing, speaking words of commitment and love, was not the same woman who had been condemned in a Denver courtroom. She was stronger, clearer, more certain of her own worth. Years later, when people asked Catherine how she had survived her imprisonment and rebuilt her life, she would speak of the physical strength required to endure hard labor, the mental strength required to maintain hope in the face of injustice. But she would always emphasize one thing above all else: the transformative power of having one person, just one person, who believed in your innocence when the world pronounced you guilty. That belief had saved her life. That belief, offered by a mountain man who understood justice in a way society never could, had given her back her future.